Have you ever wondered what happens when a narcissist reaches the end of their life? For years, they may have lived behind a mask, surrounded by drama, control, and illusions of power. But psychologists explain that old age and decline strip away those illusions. The people they manipulated grow distant, their charm fades, and the emptiness inside grows louder. The end of life for a narcissist is rarely peaceful. It's almost always marked by suffering. One reason their final years are so painful is isolation. Narcissists spend their lives pushing people away with cruelty, manipulation, and betrayal. Family, partners, and even friends eventually stop tolerating the abuse. Psychologists note that while some may endure for decades, many eventually step back. So when the narcissist needs companionship most, they often find themselves alone, abandoned by those they once controlled. This loneliness hits harder because narcissists fear being irrelevant. They thrive on attention, admiration, and being the center of the story. But in old age, when energy fades and influence shrinks, the audience disappears. Psychologists highlight that this loss of supply feels like death long before the body fails. Without admirers to feed their ego, they collapse inward, consumed by emptiness. Another reason the end of their life is filled with suffering is regret, though they rarely admit it openly. Psychologists explain that narcissists sometimes glimpse the damage they caused: broken relationships, estranged children, destroyed friendships. But instead of healing, they often twist regret into bitterness. They blame others for leaving, never accepting that their own choices caused the emptiness around them. Physical decline also exposes their fragility. Narcissists often pride themselves on beauty, power, or charisma. But aging takes that away. Wrinkles, illness, and weakness make them feel powerless. Psychologists confirm that this loss of control terrifies them, because their identity depends on superiority. When their body no longer cooperates, the mask crumbles, leaving shame and despair. Narcissists also suffer because they never built true intimacy. Real joy at the end of life often comes from love, family bonds, deep friendships, shared memories. But narcissists sabotage intimacy their whole lives. Psychologists stress that this emptiness becomes unbearable in old age. When others gather around loved ones, the narcissist often sits alone, wondering why no one stayed. Their suffering is also fueled by envy. Even in their last years, narcissists compare themselves to others. Psychologists explain that they look at peers surrounded by children, grandchildren, and love, and they feel envy instead of peace. That envy poisons whatever little joy they might have had. Instead of gratitude, their last days are filled with resentment. Another cruel twist is that many narcissists end up dependent on the very people they once abused. As illness or weakness sets in, they need caregivers. Psychologists highlight that this dependence humiliates them. They spent years controlling others, only to lose that control completely. Some even lash out at caregivers, worsening their isolation and ensuring their final days are marked by conflict. The mind also punishes them. Psychologists say many narcissists experience cycles of rumination, replaying past conflicts, betrayals, and regrets. Without the distraction of work, status, or relationships, their inner critic grows louder. Their nights are filled with restless thoughts of what could have been. Instead of peace, they drown in mental torment, haunted by the ghosts of their own actions. And here's the tragic irony: the very qualities that made them appear strong in youth, charm, control, dominance, become useless in old age. Psychologists emphasize that only love, kindness, and connection carry people through the end of life. Since narcissists rejected these qualities, they face their final chapter empty-handed. Their suffering is not random. It is the consequence of a lifetime spent choosing ego over love. One of the darkest realities is that narcissists often outlive their relationships. Psychologists note that by the time they reach the end of life, many have cycled through multiple marriages, estranged children, and broken friendships. Each burned bridge leaves them emptier. Where others lean on decades of love, the narcissist faces silence, surrounded by reminders of the people they drove away. Their health struggles also feel more unbearable because narcissists hate weakness. To admit illness is to admit imperfection, and psychologists explain this wounds their fragile ego deeply. Instead of seeking support, they may deny problems, refuse help, or lash out at doctors. This makes suffering worse because denial delays healing, and their pride becomes their prison. Financial decline can also hit them hard. Many narcissists live beyond their means to keep up appearances, but old age strips away income streams. Psychologists emphasize that this loss of wealth feels catastrophic because status symbols are part of their identity. Without money to flaunt, they feel invisible, irrelevant, and humiliated, another layer of suffering that accompanies their decline. Narcissists also lose the one thing they relied on most: control. They can no longer manipulate as effectively when their charm fades and their energy wanes. Psychologists note that this helplessness breeds rage. Instead of gracefully accepting help, they lash out in desperation. But this rage only pushes people further away, deepening the cycle of isolation and despair. What makes the end of their life so tragic is the lack of legacy. Healthy people often leave behind love, memories, and respect. Narcissists leave scars, bitterness, and unresolved pain. Psychologists explain that this knowledge gnaws at them. Deep down, they realize their life did not inspire joy, but harm. For some, this awareness becomes unbearable in their final years. Even if they deny responsibility, their bodies keep score. Stress, anger, and resentment accumulated over decades often manifest as illness. Psychologists confirm that suppressed rage and constant envy impact physical health. Heart disease, hypertension, and anxiety often accompany their later years, reminding them that their toxic way of living took a toll not just emotionally, but physically. One of the most painful realities is that narcissists rarely experience forgiveness. While others find reconciliation in old age, narcissists resist humility. Psychologists highlight that apologies and accountability could mend bonds, but narcissists avoid them. Their pride blocks healing, so instead of peace, they face the bitterness of others who remain unwilling to forget the damage they caused. They also suffer because their identity dissolves. For decades, they may have been the boss, the star, or the center of attention. But aging strips away titles and relevance. Psychologists describe this as identity collapse. Without a role to play, they are left with only themselves, and the emptiness inside becomes impossible to ignore. Even when surrounded by people, narcissists still feel alone. Psychologists note that their shallow connections prevent intimacy. Caregivers or family may show up out of duty, not love. This difference stings. They see others being visited with warmth and laughter, while their interactions feel cold and obligatory. It reinforces the truth they've denied. Love cannot be forced, only earned. The fear of death is another torment. While many people make peace with mortality through faith, legacy, or love, narcissists often dread it. Psychologists explain that this fear comes from losing control. Death cannot be manipulated, bargained, or hidden. For a narcissist, the inevitability of death feels like the ultimate defeat, filling their last days with anxiety instead of peace. Another layer of suffering is paranoia. Narcissists often believe others want to harm, betray, or abandon them. In old age, this paranoia worsens. Psychologists note that isolation fuels suspicion. They question the motives of caregivers, distrust relatives, and feel persecuted even when others mean well. This mindset poisons any chance of comfort, leaving them restless and afraid. Their arrogance also backfires. Refusing to listen to doctors, ignoring advice, and insisting they know better often worsens health issues. Psychologists confirm that this stubbornness leads to preventable suffering. Instead of healing, they prolong illness. Their refusal to admit vulnerability becomes a self-inflicted punishment in their later years. One of the hardest truths for them is realizing they are easily forgotten. For people who built their life on needing to be admired, fading into irrelevance is agony. Psychologists describe this as narcissistic collapse, the moment when their illusion of importance shatters. Without admirers, their identity disintegrates, leaving only bitterness behind. Empathy becomes their greatest source of envy. They see others surrounded by love, kindness, and forgiveness, while they sit alone. Psychologists highlight that narcissists despise the very quality they lack. Watching others receive what they can never truly feel intensifies their suffering because it confirms their worst fear. They miss the entire point of life. Even their memories betray them. When they look back, narcissists often see a trail of destruction. Relationships lost, opportunities wasted, love squandered. Psychologists say that while they try to rewrite history, in quiet moments, the truth surfaces. Instead of fond nostalgia, their final years are haunted by regret, resentment, and a gnawing awareness that they wasted their time. Some narcissists try to cling to one last victim, demanding loyalty from a partner, child, or caregiver. Psychologists warn that this desperation creates further resentment. Instead of receiving love, they receive compliance at best. This dynamic reinforces their loneliness, because deep down they know no one stays by choice, only out of obligation or fear. Their decline also exposes how shallow their charm always was. Younger narcissists can impress with looks or charisma, but in old age, those tools fade. Psychologists affirm that without these weapons, their manipulations lose power. What's left is raw insecurity, no longer hidden behind charm. That nakedness is humiliating for someone who lived their whole life behind a mask. Even attempts to reinvent themselves fail. Some narcissists try to act wise, spiritual, or nurturing in old age. But psychologists explain that without genuine change, these efforts feel hollow. People see through the performance. Instead of admiration, they receive skepticism. Their inability to truly transform makes their suffering worse, because they realize redemption requires sincerity they don't possess. Another layer of suffering comes from dependency. Narcissists hate needing others, but in old age, they rely on people for basic needs. Psychologists note that this dependence triggers rage. They lash out at the very people helping them, driving away support. It's a vicious cycle. The more they rage, the more isolated they become, and the deeper their suffering grows. Spiritual emptiness also haunts many narcissists. While others turn to faith or meaning for comfort, narcissists often struggle. Psychologists highlight that their egos resist humility, making surrender difficult. Facing mortality without faith or meaning leaves them terrified. Their inner void becomes louder in these moments, making their final chapter unbearably dark. Narcissists also lose their ability to distract themselves. In youth, they can run from emptiness with work, relationships, or status. But in old age, the distractions disappear. Psychologists describe this as confrontation with the self. They are left alone with the very emptiness they've avoided all their lives, and the silence is deafening. Their anger intensifies because they feel cheated by life. Instead of seeing how their own actions led to suffering, they blame others, the system, or fate. Psychologists explain that this external blame deepens bitterness. While others end life with gratitude, narcissists end it with rage. Their inability to accept responsibility locks them in endless resentment. They also suffer because they've never truly known love. Narcissists mistake control, admiration, and dependence for love, but psychologists affirm that love requires vulnerability, honesty, and care. At the end of life, they realize they never experienced it. That realization cuts deeper than any illness, because it confirms that everything they built was hollow. Even their bodies reflect the toll of their lifestyle. Stress, anger, and years of toxicity leave marks. Psychologists highlight that physical decline is often harsher in narcissists because their inner turmoil never allowed peace. Instead of graceful aging, they face accelerated wear. Their bodies become the mirror of the destruction they carried inside. When narcissists compare themselves to peers in old age, the difference is striking. Others are surrounded by family, laughter, and legacies of kindness. The narcissist sees themselves alone, unloved, and forgotten. Psychologists say this comparison intensifies their suffering because it proves the truth they've denied. Happiness is built on connection, not control. One of the cruelest parts of their suffering is the lack of closure. They rarely receive apologies, reconciliation, or affection in their final days. Psychologists explain that this is the price of a life built on exploitation. While others find peace in forgiveness, narcissists often die with wounds unhealed and relationships unresolved. Their fear of irrelevance becomes overwhelming. Narcissists want to be remembered, admired, even worshipped. But psychologists note that many are forgotten quickly after death. Their absence leaves little void because their presence left little joy. This truth crushes them in their final years as they realize their legacy will not outlive them. Narcissists also suffer because they can't tolerate stillness. In old age, when life slows down, they feel suffocated. Psychologists emphasize that they crave stimulation to escape their thoughts. Without it, they spiral into boredom, paranoia, and despair. Their inability to sit with themselves turns the quiet years of aging into a prison. Even attempts at reconciliation often fail. Narcissists may reach out to family, but their pride prevents true apologies. Psychologists confirm that shallow gestures rarely heal deep wounds. Loved ones see through it and keep their distance. The narcissist is left bitter, frustrated, and rejected, confirming once again that their own behavior closed the door to peace. Another torment is watching their victims heal. Narcissists see former partners or children move on, thrive, and find peace. Psychologists say this healing enrages them because it proves their abuse failed. Instead of control, they are left powerless. Their victims' joy becomes salt in their wounds, intensifying the suffering of their final years. Their pride isolates them further. Even when they crave company, their arrogance drives it away. Psychologists highlight that they refuse to admit weakness or ask for help sincerely. Instead, they demand it, criticize those who show up, and sabotage kindness. This ensures their last chapter is filled with conflict instead of compassion. Many narcissists also struggle with cognitive decline. Psychologists note that memory loss or dementia strips away their defenses, making them even more vulnerable. Without the ability to maintain their mask, their true emptiness shows. This terrifies them because for the first time they cannot pretend. Their suffering becomes raw and undeniable. The absence of gratitude adds to their pain. While others in old age reflect with thankfulness, narcissists cling to bitterness. Psychologists explain that gratitude lightens suffering, but narcissists rarely practice it. They focus on what they lost instead of what they had. This mindset ensures their last years are filled with darkness instead of light. Their inability to change seals their fate. Psychologists emphasize that growth requires humility, but narcissists reject it. Even at the edge of life, they resist accountability. This stubbornness prevents redemption. While others find peace through reflection, they remain trapped in cycles of denial. Their suffering becomes inevitable, the natural end of a life lived without self-awareness. One of the most painful truths is that narcissists die unloved, not because they weren't given chances, but because they rejected them. Psychologists note that love requires vulnerability, and they never allowed it. Their final moments are often spent wondering why no one truly cared, without realizing it was their own choices that created the void. They also fear being forgotten. Narcissists want their names to echo, their presence to linger, but psychologists confirm that their legacies rarely endure. People remember the pain they caused, not the person themselves. That fear of vanishing without meaning haunts them in their last days, filling their final thoughts with dread. Even when surrounded by family, narcissists often feel disconnected. Psychologists highlight that shallow bonds can't provide comfort. Relatives may visit, but the warmth is missing. They feel the coldness of obligation instead of love. This hollow presence reminds them of the relationships they destroyed, deepening the sense of emptiness that marks their final chapter. Their suffering is also spiritual. Without humility, they struggle to find peace in faith or meaning. Psychologists say many narcissists face death with fear instead of acceptance. They cling to life desperately, terrified of what comes next. This fear magnifies their suffering, because instead of surrender, they fight a battle they cannot win. So why is the end of life for narcissists full of suffering? because every choice they made built the foundation for it. Their cruelty, arrogance, and emptiness stripped them of love, peace, and connection. Psychologists affirm that the suffering is not punishment from outside. It is the natural harvest of the seeds they sowed all their lives. In the end, narcissists die surrounded not by love but by silence. Their suffering is the echo of a life spent chasing illusions instead of truth. And that's the lesson for us. Happiness is not built on ego, but on connection, love, and humility. If this video brought clarity, share it with someone who needs hope. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more insights into narcissistic behavior.